It was an ordinary afternoon in the middle of the city. The sun was warm, but not too hot. People moved up and down the streets, busy with their own lives. Some were heading to work, some were out shopping, and others were just wandering around, looking for something interesting to pass the time. In the middle of the town square stood a piano. It wasn't anything fancy, just a regular upright piano placed there by the city council. They wanted people to connect through music. Anyone could walk up to it and play if they wanted. It was painted with bright colors, with the words "Play Me" written on the side. Most of the time, the piano sat quietly untouched, except for a few kids banging on the keys or the occasional passerby playing a simple tune. On this particular day, the square was lively. Street performers were showing off their tricks, vendors were selling ice cream and pretzels, and the air was filled with laughter and chatter. The sound of bus horns and bicycle bells mixed with conversations, making the usual city music. Not far from the piano, a small group of friends stood around talking and laughing. One of them noticed a young woman walking slowly toward the piano. She wasn't dressed in fancy clothes, just a plain shirt and jeans. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and she carried a small worn-out backpack. She didn't look like a musician, not the kind that people expected to wow a crowd. She paused for a moment in front of the piano. Placing her backpack gently on the ground, she looked at the keys, running her fingers over them lightly, as if remembering something. The friends nearby watched her with amusement. One of the guys in the group smirked and said loud enough for others to hear, "Here we go again. Another one who thinks she can play." His friends chuckled, feeding off his energy. He crossed his arms and leaned against a lamppost, ready to be entertained, not by her music, but by what he assumed would be a clumsy attempt. The girl, however, didn't say a word. She adjusted the piano bench quietly and sat down. Her eyes stayed focused on the keys in front of her. She looked calm, almost as if she was tuning out the world around her. People walking by started to slow down, curious to see what was about to happen. After all, public performances always carried a bit of excitement. You never knew if you were about to witness something amazing or something laughable. Another person from the group commented, "Bet she doesn't even know which end of the piano to start from." That made the others laugh harder. The woman still didn't react. She didn't look up or acknowledge the remarks. Instead, she simply placed her fingers gently on the keys. A soft breeze passed through the square, carrying with it the faint sounds of street musicians playing somewhere in the distance. The scene was set: a humble woman, a city piano, a doubtful audience, and a handful of people ready to record the moment on their phones, just in case something worth sharing happened nearby. An older man sat on a bench reading his newspaper. He lowered the pages slightly to watch, curious but not expecting much. A couple holding hands paused their walk, standing just a few feet away. There was a kind of quiet tension in the air, the kind that bubbles up when something is about to happen, but nobody knows exactly what. The man who had mocked her earlier chuckled again, clearly not expecting anything special, but the woman at the piano was still silent. Her posture was relaxed, but her hands hovered just above the keys. She took a slow breath in, the way someone does before diving into a pool or stepping onto a stage. More people began to gather, drawn by the curiosity of a crowd starting to form. Some had no idea what was going on, but they stayed because everyone else was watching. And just like that, the city square, once noisy and full of scattered sounds, seemed to quiet down. People wanted to see what would happen next, and then, just before her fingers touched the keys, a final loud voice rang out from the same mocking man. "Let's see if she can even play Winkle Twinkle Little Star." That got a few more laughs from those nearby. Still, she didn't flinch. She didn't smile or frown. She was just ready. The air around the piano felt heavier, as if the whole square was holding its breath, waiting. What happened next would change everything. But in that moment, it was just her, the piano, and a crowd full of doubt. Just as her fingers hovered over the keys, a sharp whistle cut through the air. "Come on then, Mozart." The same man called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Show us how it's done." His friends burst out laughing again, a bit louder this time. The comment echoed through the square, catching the attention of even more people. Some nearby chuckled awkwardly, while others exchanged glances, unsure whether to expect a joke or a genuine performance. The woman at the piano remained still. She didn't even look up. Her hands paused just for a second, not in hesitation, but as if she was letting the noise pass by like a breeze. Then she gently placed her fingers on the keys, but before a single note was played, the man wasn't done. He stepped forward a little, as if needing the attention on him. "Look, folks," he said loudly, spinning in a half circle so everyone could hear. "We've got a prodigy here, a real piano master. Should we clap now or later?" A few giggles scattered through the crowd. The mocker smiled proudly, thinking he was the star of the moment. He didn't notice that some people were already growing uncomfortable with his words. Meanwhile, the woman stayed silent. She adjusted her seat again, not rushed or bothered. She didn't even glance his way, as if his words didn't exist. Her silence seemed to irritate him more. Maybe he wanted a reaction. Maybe he wanted her to snap back instead. Her quiet confidence made him feel strangely ignored, and so he tried one more time. Louder this time. Hey, you gonna play, or are we just having a staring contest with the piano? His voice was sharp, but this time it didn't land the same way. A few people in the crowd frowned. A woman holding her child shook her head quietly. An older man muttered under his breath, "Let her play for goodness sake." But still, the woman didn't flinch. She lifted her hands slowly, almost like a dancer raising her arms before the music starts. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys, the piano beneath her hands waiting to come alive. The mocker folded his arms, chuckling again. "Any day now," he said with a smirk. His friends joined in, still entertained by their own performance. More than hers, but the energy in the air was shifting. Something was different. The onlookers weren't laughing as much anymore. They were watching her, waiting, curious. One child sitting on their father's shoulders asked, "Is she gonna play, Dad?" "I think so," the father whispered back, eyes fixed on the piano. The woman took a slow, deep breath. She wasn't playing yet, but somehow the entire square was quieting down. She wasn't rushing, wasn't intimidated. She was simply waiting. And then, just as the square settled into silence, a nearby bird chirped loudly from a tree branch. As if it was impatient, the woman smiled. Just a small, almost invisible smile, and finally her fingers pressed the first keys. But instead of starting with a bang, the music began softly, gently. Like the first few raindrops before a storm, the mockingman raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. He turned to his friends, ready to make another joke, but something stopped him. He looked back and paused, because within just a few notes, something had changed. The sound coming from the piano wasn't clumsy. It wasn't the simple, hesitant playing that people expected. It was delicate yet precise. Every note carried a warmth that made people stop talking and just listen. Her hands moved with grace, her fingers flowing from one key to the next like water. The melody was unfamiliar, yet comforting. It felt like a story without words, and somehow, everyone could understand it. The mocker stood still, watching, his grin slowly fading. Not because he was embarrassed yet, but because for the first time he didn't have anything clever to say. People in the crowd leaned forward, trying to catch every note. A couple who had been passing by with coffee in hand stopped mid-sip. A street artist nearby set his spray paint can down. Even the pigeons around the square seemed to pause without saying a word. The woman was answering all the mockery, not with insults, but with music. She didn't need to speak. The piano was speaking for her, louder than any insult could. And just like that, the man who had tried so hard to make her look small was suddenly the one shrinking. The spotlight he wanted was no longer his, because now, all eyes were on her, and she was just getting started. At first, the sound of the piano was soft, like a quiet voice in a noisy room. But slowly, the melody grew clearer, richer, and deeper. Every note seemed to settle in the air, calming the noise of the busy square. People who had been chatting nearby started to fall silent. A man taking a phone call paused mid-sentence, lowering his voice without realizing it. A woman pushing a stroller slowed her steps, her eyes drawn to the scene unfolding around the piano. It was as if the city itself was tuning in. The mocker who had shouted earlier crossed his arms. Shifting uncomfortably, he tried to make another joke, but no one was laughing this time. His friends, who had been chuckling moments before, stood still, eyes fixed on the woman's hands. The music was changing the mood in the square. What had started as curiosity was now something else, something closer to wonder. She wasn't just playing. She was telling a story without words. Her fingers moved with ease, as if she had played this piece 1,000 times. Yet every note felt fresh, alive. She played softly at times, almost like a whisper. Then suddenly her hands would glide across the keys, filling the air with waves of sound that felt almost too big for the small piano. A little girl sitting on a bench nearby swayed gently to the music. Her mother smiled, brushing the girl's hair back. An older couple, who had just been passing through, stopped in their tracks. They looked at each other, then back at the woman playing. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. The music said it all. More people gathered. Some began recording on their phones, trying to capture what was happening. Even though it was just a simple city square, in that moment, it felt like a stage. And she was the star performer. And yet, she didn't seem to notice the growing crowd. Her eyes stayed on the keys, her face calm, focused, lost in the music. The man who had mocked her glanced around. He noticed the phones, the attention, the quiet awe in people's faces. It was the kind of crowd he wanted when he made his jokes, but now, the attention wasn't his. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, suddenly feeling small, as if the piano's sound was exposing his earlier mockery, note by note. The music kept building. It wasn't just background sound anymore. It was alive, commanding attention, pulling emotions from people, memories, feelings, things they hadn't thought about in a long time. A street performer with juggling pins in hand paused nearby, his eyes wide. He whispered to his friend, "She's incredible." The friend nodded, not wanting to speak too loudly, afraid of breaking the magic in the air nearby. A man holding a coffee cup simply stared. Forgetting to drink, his coffee grew cold, but he didn't notice. A teenager with headphones around his neck took them off, realizing that nothing in his playlist could compete with what he was hearing live, even the birds that had been flitting around the square seemed quieter, as if they were listening for a moment. The city was different. It was still the same busy square, but it didn't feel busy anymore. It felt connected, as if every person standing there was sharing the same thought. Where did she learn to play like this? When she shifted into a faster, more powerful section of the piece, a collective gasp could be heard. Her hands moved so quickly. It was almost hard to believe, yet every note was clear, not a single mistake. The crowd started to respond without realizing it, soft murmurs of amazement, quiet gasps, even the occasional whispered wow. No one was talking about the mocker anymore. In fact, some people had already forgotten about him. The spotlight had moved, and it wasn't coming back. At that point, even he couldn't pretend not to be impressed. He stood watching, his earlier grin completely gone. His friends were quiet too, no longer entertained by his jokes, but caught up in the music like everyone else. As the melody reached a high point, the crowd leaned in, as if afraid to miss a single sound, and when the music softened again, people barely breathed. It wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a moment, the kind you don't expect on an ordinary afternoon, the kind you remember, even years later. And all around her, the crowd kept growing, silently agreeing on one thing. They weren't just watching a girl play the piano, they were watching something special, something unforgettable. And still she played, her face calm, her hands steady, completely unaware that she had already changed the mood of an entire square. She was just getting started. The music was flowing beautifully. But what stood out most wasn't just the sound. It was the way she played. Her fingers didn't just press keys, they danced, like they knew every inch of the piano by heart. It was as if the piano wasn't just an instrument, but an extension of her. Every now and then, her eyes would close for a moment, not out of pride, but because she was feeling every note. Each sound seemed to pull her deeper into her own world. The crowd could see it. She wasn't playing to impress them. She was playing because the music lived inside her, and yet, the effect was powerful. Without meaning to, she had made the entire square feel like a small concert hall. People stood still, phones half raised, conversations unfinished, snacks forgotten in hands. But this wasn't just any song she was playing. It was a piece that was both delicate and bold, soft in one breath, and then grand in the next. Each note told part of a story that didn't need words, because every rise and fall of the melody carried emotion, happiness, sadness, hope, nostalgia, even something close to heartbreak. Somewhere near the back of the crowd, a man in a suit stopped in his tracks. He had been rushing to a meeting, but now his steps slowed. He looked at his watch, sighed, and stayed. Somehow, the meeting didn't feel as urgent anymore. A teenage boy with a skateboard sat cross-legged on the ground, his board next to him. His mouth hung open slightly, eyes fixed on her hands. He wasn't sure why, but something about the way she played made him feel like crying and smiling at the same time. The city's noise was still there, the distant traffic, the occasional honk. But the music rose above it all, commanding attention. The woman's hands glided faster, her fingers a blur, but every note was clean. Each chord she played felt like a step deeper into the story. People didn't just hear the music. They felt it in their chests, in the back of their throats. And then something remarkable happened. An old man, who had been sitting quietly on a bench, removed his cap and placed it over his heart. His eyes were glassy, and he whispered to no one in particular, "She's got a gift." Nearby, the woman with the stroller swayed gently with her baby, humming along to a tune she didn't know, but somehow recognized in her soul. Even the mocker, the loud one who had started it all, stood with his arms crossed, his smirk long gone. He didn't have any jokes left. Every clever comment he might have made felt small and stupid compared to the music he was hearing. For the first time, he was really listening, and deep inside, though he would never admit it, he felt small as the woman played. Her entire posture remained relaxed. She wasn't showing off. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just playing. as if she had waited all day to sit at that piano. The crowd kept growing, inching closer. Standing shoulder to shoulder, a woman on the phone whispered, "Hang on, you need to hear this," and held her phone up so the person on the other end could listen. The sun above the square had shifted slightly, casting soft light over the scene, making the piano, once just an old painted thing, look almost magical. When the woman shifted into a gentler part of the song, the crowd seemed to breathe together. People closed their eyes, swaying slightly. Some smiled, others stood quietly, lost in thought. It was no longer just about the music. It was about the moment. A random afternoon had turned into something special, something that none of them had expected, and yet, through it all, the woman didn't ask for applause. She didn't demand attention. She simply played, because for her, the music itself was enough. No announcements, no introductions, just a woman and her music. The first notes may have started soft and uncertain to the crowd, but now they carried weight. The weight of talent, of stories unspoken, of emotions shared without a single word. And though no one said it aloud, everyone watching felt it deep down. They were witnessing something rare, something that wouldn't be easily forgotten, and still, her fingers moved, telling a story that wasn't over yet. By now, the square wasn't just filled with people, it was wrapped in the music. Something about the way she played was changing the entire space. It wasn't just background sound anymore. It was the heart of the moment. The reason strangers stood together without saying a word. Her fingers moved faster now, her hands sweeping across the keys like they had a mind of their own. The melody grew deeper, stronger, each note echoing like a wave spreading through the crowd. The transformation wasn't just in the music. It was in the faces of the people watching. The skeptical looks had faded, replaced by wide eyes, soft smiles, even a few tearful glances. The woman who had approached the piano looking so ordinary was no longer just some girl on the street. She was a force somewhere near the back. A man with a guitar strapped to his back shook his head slowly, whispering to himself, "That's real talent." He didn't even feel jealous, just inspired. A woman in her 60s stood clutching a small shopping bag. Her eyes were wet, but she smiled. She didn't know why the music made her feel like remembering old times, but it did. Even the pigeons that usually fluttered around the square were still, perched on railings and statues as if they were listening. And the mocker, the one who had made the loudest jokes, looked smaller now. His confident smirk was gone. His arms had dropped to his sides. He was staring, not saying a word. He couldn't. Something in the music had silenced him in a way no argument ever could. He probably thought she'd come up here and hit a few wrong notes, maybe fumble around until people laughed. But now, he was watching someone play not just skillfully, but beautifully, powerfully. And it didn't just make him wrong. It made him rethink. Some people in the crowd started recording. Others didn't dare move, afraid that the slightest noise might break the spell. Then she played a section so swift, so intricate, that even people who didn't understand music knew they were seeing something rare. Her hands moved in a blur, yet each sound was crisp, clear. A young man with a camera whispered, "She's playing like a legend," and he wasn't exaggerating. It wasn't about the piano anymore. It was about her, the way she moved, the emotion in her face, the control in her fingers. It was all working together like magic. You could see it in people's faces. The crowd wasn't just watching. They were feeling, remembering, dreaming. It was like the music had unlocked something in them. And still, the woman didn't ask for attention. She didn't even seem aware of how many people had gathered. She was somewhere else, inside the music. She swayed slightly with each phrase, her eyes closed at moments, as if she was seeing the story she was telling through the keys, and the crowd could feel it too. This wasn't just talent. This was passion, life experience, something that couldn't be faked. What started as a few simple notes had transformed into a full performance, rich with depth. Her music was like a conversation, but not one of words. It was a conversation of feelings. It was proof, right in front of them, that sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the loudest voice. You just have to know how to listen. And that's when the crowd began to shift from just watching to truly appreciating. People began to nod their heads, sway gently. Some smiled to themselves. Others simply closed their eyes, letting the music pull them somewhere else. Even the man who had mocked her earlier looked different now. His eyes weren't filled with sarcasm anymore, but with something closer to respect, or maybe even regret. Because no matter what he said before, he couldn't deny it now. He was watching a master at work, and she wasn't finished yet. It was strange, really, only minutes ago. The loud man had been the center of attention, his jokes, his laughter, his smug confidence. All eyes were on him. He wanted people to notice, to laugh along, to see him as the clever one. But now, no one was looking his way. They were all staring at her, The woman at the piano. The one he thought would stumble, would make a fool of herself. Instead, she was stealing the show. His friends, who once laughed the loudest, stood quietly now. Their faces weren't amused anymore. They looked captivated. One of them even whispered under his breath, "She's really good." And that was the truth. She wasn't just good. She was extraordinary. The music poured out of the piano. Powerful and pure, every note filled the air like a story too big for words. The mocker stood there, unsure of what to do. Part of him wanted to crack another joke, maybe say something clever to get the crowd back, but the words never came, because deep down, he knew nothing he said could compete with this. He watched her hands move effortlessly across the keys. Every movement seemed intentional, precise, yet completely free. She didn't play like someone showing off. She played like someone who belonged. For the first time, he felt a pinch of shame. He had judged her before she even played a single note. He had written her off, based on nothing more than her quiet nature and simple clothes. But now, watching her command the piano, watching the crowd lean in, mesmerized, he realized how wrong he had been. He looked around, hoping to catch someone's eye, maybe share a shrug, a laugh, anything to ease his own discomfort. But no one was looking. They were all with her, following every note, every rise and fall of the music. Even the street performers nearby had stopped their acts, juggling pins held still, guitars resting by their sides. And the crowd, they weren't just watching, they were feeling. Every face showed it, wonder, admiration, even a little awe. Some people had tears in their eyes, others stood smiling, heads tilted, just listening. It wasn't just music anymore, it was an experience. And the mocker, the man who had tried to be the loudest voice in the square, was silent. He didn't know what else to do. He could feel his earlier laughter hanging in the air like a mistake everyone had heard. But the woman never looked up. She never glanced his way, never gave him the satisfaction of a reaction. She just kept playing. And with every note, she wasn't just playing the piano, she was rewriting the entire scene. The girl he laughed at, she was a legend now. The city square didn't belong to him anymore. It didn't even belong to the crowd. It belonged to her and her music. For a brief moment, he considered leaving, just walking away. But he couldn't. His feet stayed planted. His eyes locked on her hands. His ego had taken a hit, sure, but his heart, even he couldn't deny the truth. She was brilliant, and for once, he was glad to stay silent. Because some moments don't need jokes. They just need to be witnessed. By now, the square didn't look like just a regular public space anymore. It looked like a concert. A quiet one, yes, but no less powerful. People stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on the woman at the piano. More folks arrived, drawn by the music floating through the air. They came from nearby cafes, shops, and street corners. Some peeked over shoulders, others stood on benches just to catch a better view. There was no stage, no lights, no microphone, yet everyone knew they were watching something special. It wasn't every day that a random afternoon in the city turned into a memory. People held up their phones, capturing the moment. Some streamed it live, others just recorded quietly, thinking, "I need to remember this." A man whispered to his friend, "I was just passing by. I wasn't even supposed to be here." His friend nodded, eyes never leaving the piano, same, "But I'm glad I stayed." The sun hung a little lower now, casting golden light across the square. It made the scene even more beautiful, as if the world itself wanted to frame this moment just right. Somewhere in the middle of the crowd, a child sat on her dad's shoulders, wide-eyed. She didn't know much about music, but she knew this was something different. She tugged at her dad's ear and said softly, "She plays like a princess." Her dad smiled, eyes misty. "Yeah, she really does." Even the street vendors, usually shouting offers for snacks and drinks, had gone quiet. One of them stood behind his cart, arms crossed, just listening. A woman in business attire stood frozen, holding her coffee cup midair. She hadn't taken a sip in minutes, too absorbed in the music. It was like time had slowed down. Everyone was there together. Strangers connected by the same sound, the same feeling, and in the center of it all, she kept playing, still unaware of just how many people stood around her. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't looking for likes or applause. She was just sharing a piece of herself through every note. The music grew softer now, like a gentle wave easing back into the ocean, and the crowd followed, their breathing, their stillness, all in rhythm with the sound. No one wanted to leave. Not yet, because how often does life pause like this? How often does the world stop moving just to listen? People who had come for other reasons, shopping, working, wandering, forgot all of it. In that square, they were all the same, listeners, dreamers, witnesses. And though no one said it aloud, a quiet truth hung in the air. They knew they'd be telling this story later. "I was there," they'd say, "I saw her play." And somewhere in the back of the crowd, the man who had mocked her stood still. Hands in his pockets, he didn't laugh, didn't joke, he just watched quietly for the first time. He wasn't the loudest voice, and he was okay with that. Because some music doesn't just fill your ears, it fills your heart, and that's exactly what she was doing, note by note. She was filling the heart of the city, and still, she played. As the final notes drifted into the air, the square stood completely still. No one clapped yet, no one moved. It was as if they all needed a moment to catch their breath, to let the music settle inside them. Then, slowly someone started clapping, soft at first, hesitant, then another joined, and another, and suddenly, the square erupted. A wave of applause swept through the crowd, hands clapping, voices cheering. People smiled at each other, strangers nodding in agreement, as if to say, "We just saw something rare." Some even whistled, others called out, "Bravo," or "That was amazing." The woman at the piano finally looked up. Her eyes were gentle. Almost surprised by the size of the crowd, she smiled, not big or flashy, but the quiet kind of smile that says thank you without needing to say a word. For a moment, she sat there, letting the noise of the crowd wash over her. She didn't bow, didn't wave. She just closed her eyes briefly, as if saving the moment for herself. Then calmly, she stood up. She picked up her old backpack, slung it over her shoulder, and looked around. That's when her eyes finally met his. The man who had mocked her, he stood frozen, hands in his pockets. His face was a mixture of emotions, shame, respect, and maybe a bit of wonder. They stared at each other just for a second. She didn't glare. She didn't smirk. She didn't need to. Her eyes simply said, "I didn't need to prove you wrong. The music did that for me." Then, without a word, she turned and began to walk away, her steps light, her posture calm, as if she was just another person passing through. But the crowd wasn't ready to let her go. Some people called after her, asking her name. Others wanted to know where she learned to play, but she didn't answer. She kept walking, disappearing down the street just like she had arrived, quietly, and yet everyone knew they wouldn't forget her. Not the way she looked, not the sound of her playing, not the feeling she left behind. She had walked into the square like a stranger, but she left as a story that each person would tell differently, but all with the same ending. She played like a legend, and as the crowd slowly began to scatter, the man who had mocked her stood still, staring at the empty piano. He didn't laugh, he didn't joke, he just watched, because some lessons don't need to be taught with words sometimes. They're taught in music, and in that square, on that ordinary afternoon, everyone learned something, especially him.